I'm Savannah, and I'm 28. My mother blocked my grandmother's phone number yesterday. Apparently, asking for help with medication costs makes you a burden. My Aunt Rebecca actually wrote in our family group chat that she's already lived long enough. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the family disappointment. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to where this all started, because understanding my family requires understanding one simple truth. I was never supposed to exist. My mother, Lisa, was 19 when she got pregnant with me, fresh out of high school, dating a guy her parents hated, and completely unprepared for motherhood. I was, to put it delicately, an inconvenience. While other kids grew up with bedtime stories about how much their parents wanted them, I grew up knowing I was a mistake. Not the kind of mistake parents eventually embrace with happy accident stories. The kind of mistake that derails plans, ruins futures, and creates resentment that never quite fades. Because nothing says unconditional love like constantly being reminded you ruined someone's life plan, right? When I was 4, my mother met Robert. Robert was everything my father wasn't. Stable, employed, respectable. He wanted to marry my mother, but he came with conditions. He was willing to take on a woman with a past, but he wasn't interested in raising someone else's child. So my mother made a choice. She chose her future over her daughter. Shocking, I know. I remember the day she packed my little pink suitcase. She told me I was going to stay with Grandma Rose for a little while, just until things got settled. That little while turned into forever. By the time I turned 5, my mother had married Robert, moved to a nice suburb 40 miles away, and started her real family. First came my half-brother, Tyler, then my half-sister, Madison, 2 years later. To be fair, my mother didn't abandon me completely. She visited sometimes, usually around holidays or birthdays, bringing expensive gifts that felt more like guilt payments than expressions of love. She'd take photos of us together, evidence for her friends that she was still a good mother to her firstborn. But then she'd leave again, returning to her picture-perfect family where I didn't fit. Must be nice to have a family you can just visit when it's convenient. My grandmother, Rose, became everything to me. She was 53 when I moved in permanently, a widow who had been looking forward to enjoying her independence. Instead, she got a traumatized 4-year-old who had nightmares about being left behind. Talk about drawing the short straw. But here's the thing about Grandma Rose. She never made me feel like a burden. When I asked why Mommy didn't want me anymore, she sat me down in her kitchen, made us both hot chocolate, and said, "Sometimes people make choices that don't make sense to the rest of us, sweetheart, but you're exactly where you're supposed to be." She worked double shifts at the local diner to afford things like dance classes and school supplies. When other kids had parents at school events, Grandma Rose was there in her waitress uniform, clapping louder than anyone else. She helped me with homework, even though she'd only finished 8th grade herself, and she read to me every single night until I was old enough to be embarrassed by it. The rest of my mother's family treated me like a reminder of her poor judgment. They were polite enough, but there was always an underlying message. You don't really belong here. At family gatherings, I was the kid who sat at the children's table long past the age when my cousins had graduated to the adult table. I was the one they forgot to include in group photos, the afterthought when planning family vacations, because nothing builds self-esteem like being consistently treated as an optional family member. My Aunt Rebecca, my mother's sister, was particularly skilled at making me feel unwanted. She had this way of asking about my mother with false concern. "How is Lisa doing? It must be so hard for her, having to worry about you on top of everything else." The implication was always clear. I was a problem that needed to be managed, a complication in my mother's otherwise successful life. But Grandma Rose, she saw me differently. To her, I wasn't a mistake or a burden. I was her granddaughter, period. She celebrated every small achievement like it was a major victory. When I made honor roll, she put the certificate on the refrigerator and left it there for 2 years. When I got accepted to college with a partial scholarship, she cried happy tears and took me out for the most expensive dinner we could afford. She never had much money, but she had endless love and an unshakable belief in my worth. When I doubted myself, which was often, given how the rest of the family treated me, she'd remind me of all the things I'd already overcome. "You're stronger than you think, Savannah. You've been proving that since you were 4 years old." That strength she saw in me, I was about to need every bit of it. By the time I graduated college, the family dynamics had settled into a predictable pattern. My mother maintained just enough contact to avoid looking like a complete deadbeat, but never enough to actually build a relationship. She'd send Christmas cards with generic messages and occasionally like my Facebook posts, but she never called just to see how I was doing. Because why would you want to actually talk to your firstborn daughter when you could just hit the thumbs up button on her life updates? Tyler and Madison, my half-siblings, grew up knowing about me, but not really knowing me. To them, I was more like a distant cousin who showed up at major family events, present but not really part of the inner circle. They were polite when we interacted, but there was always this invisible barrier. They had grown up in the same house, shared inside jokes, and had memories I wasn't part of. I was the sister with an asterisk. The "oh yeah, Lisa has another daughter" footnote in their family story. Meanwhile, Grandma Rose aged gracefully but stubbornly. Even as she entered her 70s, she refused to slow down. She kept working at the diner until she was 75, claiming she needed something to keep her busy. The truth was, she was still worried about money, specifically about having enough to help me if I needed it. Because that's what you do when you actually love someone. You worry about their future even when you can barely afford your own present. When I got my first real job after college working at a marketing firm in the city, Grandma Rose was prouder than any parent has ever been. She saved every article I wrote, every campaign I worked on, even though she didn't really understand what digital marketing meant. "My granddaughter is in advertising," she'd tell anyone who would listen, as if I was running Madison Avenue instead of managing social media accounts for small businesses. I moved to an apartment closer to work, about an hour away from Grandma Rose's house. It was the farthest I'd ever lived from her, and we both felt the distance. We talked on the phone every other day, sometimes more if something interesting happened or if she was worried about me eating enough vegetables. You know, normal grandparent concerns. Unlike my actual parents who couldn't be bothered to check if I was still breathing, she never quite understood my generation's approach to relationships and careers. When I told her I was focused on building my career before settling down, she'd nod supportively, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She wanted me to find someone who would love me the way she did, unconditionally and completely. "You deserve someone who sees how special you are," she'd say during our Sunday phone calls. "Don't settle for anything less than that." The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had shown me what unconditional love looked like was also the one encouraging me not to settle for less. While the family that should have loved me unconditionally treated me like an obligation they couldn't quite shake. During this time, the extended family had created a group text that included everyone except Grandma Rose and me. I only found out about it when my cousin Jennifer accidentally added me to a thread discussing Christmas plans. The message that came through made it clear they'd been coordinating family events without us for months. Because nothing says family unity like secretly planning gatherings that exclude the people who need inclusion most. When I mentioned it to Grandma Rose, she just shrugged. "They can have their little club? Sweetheart, we don't need their approval to be a family." But I could see it hurt her more than she let on. These were her children and grandchildren, and they were systematically excluding her from family discussions. She'd raised them, supported them through their own difficulties, and now that she was older and potentially needier, they were pulling away. That's when I started paying closer attention to the family dynamics. During holiday gatherings, I noticed how quickly conversations stopped when Grandma Rose entered a room. I saw how they'd make plans for group activities but somehow forget to mention them to her until it was too late for her to join. It was like watching a masterclass in passive-aggressive exclusion. The worst part was watching her pretend not to notice. She'd smile and nod along when they talked about trips they'd taken or restaurants they'd tried, never mentioning that she hadn't been invited. She maintained her dignity even as her own children treated her like a burden. Because that's what happens when you've spent your whole life putting other people's feelings before your own. You become an expert at swallowing your own pain. It made me furious, but Grandma Rose always counseled patience. "People get caught up in their own lives," she'd say. "They don't mean to be hurtful." I wasn't so generous in my assessment. These were adults who had benefited from her sacrifices for decades, and now that she needed them to step up, they were finding excuses to step back. Revolutionary concept. Maybe when someone spends their entire life taking care of you, you could return the favor when they get older. The shift became more obvious as Grandma Rose hit her mid-70s. Her arthritis made it harder for her to drive long distances, so she attended fewer family gatherings. Instead of offering to pick her up or planning events closer to her home, the family simply stopped expecting her to attend. When she mentioned this to my Aunt Rebecca, the response was telling. "Mom, you know how busy everyone is. It's just easier this way." Easier for whom? Certainly not for the woman who had spent decades making things easier for everyone else. I started visiting Grandma Rose more frequently, driving out to her house every weekend instead of every other week. We'd cook together, watch her favorite game shows, and work in her garden. She was slower than she used to be, but her mind was sharp as ever, and her sense of humor hadn't dimmed at all. "You know what I realized the other day?" she said while we were planting tomatoes one Saturday afternoon. "I spent so many years worried about being a burden on my children that I forgot to expect them to act like family." That comment stayed with me long after I drove home that evening. It was the first crack in her usual optimistic armor, the first acknowledgement that maybe her children's behavior wasn't as innocent as she'd been pretending. I should have known then that worse things were coming. The family group text was created on a Tuesday in October. I know this because my cousin Jennifer, clearly the technological coordinator of the family, accidentally included me in the initial setup message before quickly removing me and sending a private apology text. Sorry, that was meant for the family group. The family group. As if I wasn't family. But hey, at least they were being honest about how they saw me for once. I screenshotted that message, not out of pettiness, but because it perfectly captured how they saw me. I was family adjacent, family when convenient, excluded when it made their lives simpler. What I didn't know at the time was that Grandma Rose hadn't been included either, because apparently, being the woman who birthed and raised half these people doesn't automatically qualify you for the inner circle. For months, I watched from the outside as my extended family became increasingly coordinated in ways that didn't include us. Birthday parties I heard about after the fact. Thanksgiving plans that somehow got forgotten to be shared with the two of us. Christmas gift exchanges that we weren't informed about until someone posted photos on Facebook. The exclusion was systematic but maintained plausible deniability. Oh, we thought someone else had told you. We figured you'd be too busy to come anyway. We planned it so last minute we didn't want to put pressure on you. Standard operating procedure for people who want to be cruel while maintaining the moral high ground. Grandma Rose handled it with her usual grace, at least publicly. She never complained or demanded explanations. When she found out about events after they happened, she'd just smile and say something like, "Well, it sounds like everyone had a wonderful time." Because that's what a lifetime of putting other people's feelings first will teach you, how to swallow your own disappointment with a smile. But I started noticing small changes in her behavior. She was eating less, sleeping more, and that characteristic cheerfulness seemed a little forced. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd insist she was fine, but I could see through the facade. It's amazing how quickly you can spot fake happiness when you've been performing it yourself for most of your life. The truth was, being systematically excluded by your own children takes a toll, no matter how strong you are. In December, things escalated. My mother posted a series of photos from what looked like an elaborate family gathering. Multiple generations, everyone dressed up, clearly some kind of significant event. Tyler had gotten engaged, and they'd thrown a surprise engagement party for everyone except Grandma Rose and me. Because nothing says surprise like making sure the guest list excludes the people who actually care about your happiness. When I called Grandma Rose to ask if she'd known about it, there was a long pause before she answered. "I saw the photos on Facebook," she said quietly. "It looked lovely. Did anyone tell you about it beforehand?" Another pause. "Your mother said they wanted to keep it small and intimate." Small and intimate. 15 family members, but not the woman who had raised half of them. Interesting definition of intimate. That night, I lay awake thinking about the casual cruelty of it all. These weren't strangers or distant acquaintances. These were people who had eaten Grandma Rose's cooking, slept in her house, borrowed her money, and relied on her free babysitting for decades. And now, when she was in her late 70s and needed inclusion the most, they were systematically pushing her to the margins. I decided to call my mother directly. Time for some uncomfortable truths. "Savannah, hi, honey," she answered, her voice artificially bright. "Did you see Tyler's pictures? Isn't Rebecca's ring beautiful?" "Her name is Rebecca, Mom. Tyler's engaged to Rebecca." The fact that my mother couldn't even remember her future daughter-in-law's name correctly was telling. "And yes, the pictures looked lovely. I'm just wondering why Grandma Rose and I weren't invited." Silent. Then, "Well, it was very last minute, and we knew you both had busy schedules." "It was a surprise party, Mom. By definition, the guests don't know about it in advance. And Grandma Rose doesn't exactly have a packed social calendar. Unless watching game shows and worrying about her medication costs counts as living it up." More silence. I could practically hear her scrambling for an excuse that didn't make her sound like a terrible daughter and mother. "It's complicated, Savannah. There are family dynamics you don't understand." Family dynamics. That was rich, coming from the woman who had literally given me away to avoid complications in her own life. "Try me," I said. "I'm pretty good at understanding family dynamics, considering I've been navigating the complicated ones in our family for 24 years. She sighed, clearly irritated that I wasn't letting this drop. "If you must know, some people felt it would be less stressful if we kept the guest list to immediate family." Some people. Never her, always some nebulous people making these decisions. How convenient to never take personal responsibility for your choices. And Grandma Rose isn't immediate family? You know what I mean, Savannah. But I did know what she meant. And that was the problem. In their minds, Grandma Rose had been demoted from matriarch to obligation. She was no longer someone whose presence enhanced their gatherings. She was someone whose needs complicated their logistics. After I hung up, I drove straight to Grandma Rose's house. I found her in her living room, looking through a photo album of family pictures from when my mother and Aunt Rebecca were young. "They used to include me in everything," she said without looking up when I sat down beside her. "I was the one who hosted every holiday, every birthday, every celebration. Now I find out about them on social media like a stranger." It was the most honest thing she'd said about the situation, and hearing the hurt in her voice made my chest tight with anger. "They don't deserve you," I said. She looked up then, her eyes watery, but her voice steady. "They're still my children, Savannah. I don't know how to stop loving them, even when they act like I'm invisible." That's when I realized just how deep this rejection went. It wasn't just about missed parties or forgotten invitations. They were erasing her from their lives while she was still alive, treating her like she was already gone. I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The message came through on a Thursday morning while I was in a client meeting. My phone buzzed against the conference table, and I glanced down to see a notification from a group text I didn't recognize. When the meeting ended, I checked my phone properly. I had been added to the family group text. Finally. But as I read through the message history, my excitement quickly turned to confusion, then horror. Because apparently, my inclusion wasn't about newfound family love, it was about witnessing a masterclass in casual cruelty. The first message was from Grandma Rose, sent at 6:47 a.m. "Good morning, everyone. I hate to ask, but I'm having trouble affording my medications this month. The insurance isn't covering as much as it used to, and I'm about $200 short. Could anyone help me out? I can pay it back gradually." It was such a simple, humble request. $200 for medication. From a woman who had spent decades helping everyone else financially whenever they needed it. You know, back when she was useful to them. The next message was from my Aunt Rebecca, sent 20 minutes later. "Mom, have you tried asking the pharmacy about payment plans?" Then my mother. "There are programs for seniors, Mom. Maybe look into those?" My cousin Jennifer. "Could you maybe skip the non-essential medications for now?" Skip the non-essential medications? As if any medication prescribed to a 77-year-old woman was non-essential. Right, let's just play Russian roulette with Grandma's health because asking family for help is such an inconvenience. I kept reading, feeling sicker with each message, person after person offering advice, suggestions, anything except actual help. They were treating her request like it was an inconvenience, a problem to be solved with minimal effort on their part, like she was asking them to donate a kidney instead of the cost of a nice dinner out. Then came the message that made my hands shake with rage. Aunt Rebecca. Honestly, at her age, how much longer does she really need these medications anyway? She's already lived longer than most people. I stared at that message until my eyes burned. This was my grandmother they were talking about. The woman who had raised their children when they needed babysitting, who had loaned them money for cars and down payments, who had never missed a birthday or holiday despite being systematically excluded from family planning. And their response to her asking for help with medication was to suggest that maybe she didn't need to live much longer anyway. Because nothing says family values like questioning whether your elderly mother deserves to stay alive. The group went quiet after that message. I waited, hoping someone would push back, tell Rebecca that was a horrible thing to say. But the silence stretched on. Apparently, no one found her comment objectionable enough to challenge. Or maybe they all agreed and just didn't want to say it out loud. Finally, around lunchtime, there was another message from Grandma Rose. "Never mind, everyone. I'll figure something out. Sorry to bother you all." Sorry to bother them. She was apologizing for needing help to stay alive, for having the audacity to think her own children might care whether she could afford the medications keeping her heart beating. I screenshotted every single message in that thread before responding. When dealing with people this callous, documentation is important. Plus, I had a feeling these messages might come in handy later. My message was simple. "Grandma Rose, don't worry about it. I'll take care of the medication costs. Can you call me this evening?" The response was immediate. Suddenly, everyone had opinions. Amazing how quickly they developed voices when someone else was stepping up to do what they wouldn't. Rebecca. "Savannah, you don't need to do that. Mom can handle her own expenses." Mom. "Sweetie, we were just trying to help her find sustainable solutions." Jennifer. "She's probably exaggerating how much she needs anyway." The backpedaling was almost as disgusting as the original messages. Now that someone was actually offering to help, they wanted to minimize the problem and make it seem like I was overreacting, because heaven forbid they look like the heartless children they actually were. I typed and deleted several responses, each one more scathing than the last. Finally, I settled on something that would make my position crystal clear without giving them ammunition to use against me later. I'm happy to help my grandmother with whatever she needs. That's what family does for each other. The emphasis on family was intentional. Let them choke on the implication. But I wasn't done. I called Grandma Rose immediately. "Honey, you don't have to worry about my medications," she said as soon as she answered. I was probably being dramatic. These old bones don't need as much maintenance as I thought. "Grandma, stop!" My voice was sharper than I intended. "You weren't being dramatic. You asked your family for help with a basic need and they treated you like a burden. That's not okay. They're busy, Savannah. Everyone has their own. They're not too busy to plan elaborate parties and post about them on social media. They're not too busy to coordinate group texts and family activities. They're only too busy when you need something from them. Funny how selective their busy schedules are." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from her, "I know." That admission broke my heart. She'd been protecting their reputations even to me, pretending their neglect was innocent oversight instead of deliberate cruelty. Because that's what good mothers do. They protect their children's images even when those children are destroying them. "I'm coming to see you this weekend," I said. "We're going to the pharmacy together, and we're going to make sure you have everything you need. And Grandma, you're never, ever going to apologize for needing help again." After we hung up, I sat in my car outside the office building, shaking with fury. These people had spent decades benefiting from her generosity, and the moment she needed something back, they tried to make her feel guilty for asking. Well, I had news for them. Some family members actually show up when it matters. I just had no idea how much this simple act of decency was about to change everything. That weekend, I drove to Grandma Rose's house with a car full of groceries and a head full of anger I was trying to keep under control. She deserved my support, not my rage, even though the rage was entirely on her behalf. I found her in her kitchen, making tea with hands that shook slightly, whether from age or emotion. I couldn't tell. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said, but her relief at seeing me was obvious. "Yes, I did. I started unpacking groceries, including several bags from the pharmacy. I picked up your medications, all of them, for the next 3 months." Her eyes filled with tears. "Savannah, that's too much. I can't let you. You can and you will." I sat down across from her at the small kitchen table where she'd helped me with homework for years. "Grandma, can I ask you something honestly?" She nodded. "How long has it been since any of them actually helped you with anything?" She thought for a moment, stirring her tea absently. "Your mother brought me a casserole when I had that cold last winter." "A casserole? When you were sick? What about anything significant?" Because apparently one casserole is supposed to make up for a lifetime of taking care of everyone else. Another long pause. "I suppose it's been a while since they've needed to help me with much. Because you've been handling everything yourself, haven't you? Even when it was getting harder." She didn't answer, but the truth was written all over her face. She'd been struggling financially for months, maybe longer, trying to maintain her independence while her own children patted themselves on the back for their busy lives. "Can I see that group text again?" I asked gently. Reluctantly, she showed me her phone. I read through the messages again, my anger building with each dismissive response. But it was the message I'd missed that really got to me, the one that came after Aunt Rebecca's comment about Grandma Rose having lived long enough. My cousin Derek, Rebecca's son, had written, "Maybe it's time to start thinking about other options for Grandma. Assisted living places handle all this medication stuff. Other options." They weren't just dismissing her current needs. They were already planning to ship her off to a facility so they wouldn't have to deal with her aging at all. Because nothing says loving family like planning to warehouse your elderly grandmother, because her needs are inconvenient. "Did you see Derek's message about assisted living?" I asked. Grandma Rose's face tightened. "I saw it. Is that something you want?" "What I want doesn't seem particularly relevant to anyone anymore," she said with more bitterness than I'd ever heard from her. That evening, we sat on her front porch watching the sunset, something we'd done countless times when I was younger. The silence between us was comfortable, but I could feel her sadness like a weight in the air. "I keep wondering where I went wrong with them," she finally said. "I thought I raised them to be kind people." "You did raise them to be kind. They're choosing not to be. But why? What did I do to make them think so little of me?" The question hung between us, unanswerable and heartbreaking. Because the truth was, she hadn't done anything wrong. She'd loved them, supported them, sacrificed for them, and now they were repaying that love with neglect and resentment. Revolutionary concept. Maybe the problem isn't with the person who gave everything, but with the people who took it all for granted. "You didn't do anything," I said firmly. Some people just get uncomfortable when the person who used to take care of them starts needing care themselves. It forces them to grow up, and they're not ready for that responsibility. She nodded slowly. "I never wanted to be a burden." "Needing help doesn't make you a burden, Grandma. It makes you human." That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and making plans. Not revenge plans. I'm not that dramatic. But practical plans. Grandma Rose needed an advocate, someone who would show up when she needed help, someone who wouldn't treat her like an inconvenience. Since her own children had abdicated that responsibility, it fell to me, and honestly, I was honored to step up where they'd stepped down. The next morning, I made a decision that would change both our lives, though I had no way of knowing it at the time. I'm going to start coming here every weekend, I announced over breakfast, and I'm going to set up automatic payments for your medications, utilities, and groceries. Consider it a family support system. Honey, you can't afford to take care of both of us. You have your own life to build. My life includes you, Grandma. It always has. Because that's how real family works. You don't abandon people when they need you most. She cried then, quietly but steadily, and I knew they were tears of relief as much as gratitude. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother, and her tone was decidedly cold. Savannah, we need to talk about this situation with your grandmother. What situation would that be, Mom? This financial arrangement you've made with her. It's sending the wrong message to everyone. What message would that be? That the rest of us don't care about her. I couldn't help myself. I laughed. Mom, the rest of you don't care about her. You literally suggested she might not need her medications because she's lived long enough. That's not what Rebecca meant, and you know it. Then what did she mean? Because I'm genuinely curious how else you interpret suggesting someone's lived long enough when they ask for help staying alive. Silence. Because there was no other way to interpret that comment, and we both knew it. Look, my mother continued. We appreciate that you want to help, but you're making the rest of us look bad. And there it was. The truth. They didn't care that Grandma Rose was struggling. They cared that my helping her highlighted their neglect. It wasn't about her well-being. It was about their reputation. Good, I said simply. You should look bad, because you are bad, at least when it comes to her. I hung up before she could respond. 2 days after that conversation, something arrived that would change everything, though none of us knew it at the time. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. I was already in bed scrolling through emails on my phone when it rang. Grandma Rose never called this late, so I answered immediately, my heart racing. Grandma, is everything okay? Oh, honey, I'm so sorry to call so late. Her voice sounded strange, not upset. Exactly, but different somehow, like she was trying not to laugh at a private joke. I couldn't sleep and I need to ask you something important. I sat up, fully alert now. What is it? Are you feeling okay? I'm fine, physically. It's just, something happened today and I need to see you. Could you come this weekend? I know it's short notice and you're already doing so much. I'm always coming this weekend, remember? That's our new routine. Because apparently I'm the only family member who understands the concept of consistency. Right, of course, there's something I need to tell you in person. Something important. There was something in her tone I'd never heard before. Not sadness or worry, but something I couldn't quite identify. Excitement? No, that wasn't quite right either. More like vindication? Are you sure you're okay? You sound different. I'm better than okay, sweetheart. I just need to talk to you face to face. Can you come Friday evening instead of Saturday morning? I have some things I want to discuss with you. Of course. I'll leave work early and drive out after traffic dies down. Perfect. And Savannah? Thank you for everything you've done for me these past few months. I don't know what I would have done without you. Her voice had this weird quality to it, like she was trying not to burst out laughing. After we hung up, I lay awake wondering what could be so important that it couldn't wait until our regular weekend visit. Grandma Rose wasn't typically mysterious about anything. If something was wrong, she usually just said so. If something was exciting, she shared it immediately. This secretive version of her was completely new territory. Friday couldn't come fast enough. I left work at 3 p.m. telling my boss I had a family situation that needed attention. By 5:30, I was on the highway heading to Grandma Rose's house, my mind running through possibilities. Maybe she'd decided she did want to look into assisted living. Maybe she'd heard from a doctor about something concerning. Maybe the family had said something else horrible to her and she was finally ready to cut them off completely. The drive usually took 90 minutes, but I made it in 75, my anxiety making my foot heavier on the gas pedal. When I pulled into her driveway, the first thing I noticed was that all the lights were on. Every single window glowed warmly against the early evening darkness. That was unusual. Grandma Rose was careful about electricity bills, and typically only lit the rooms she was using. The second thing I noticed was how good the house looked. The porch was swept clean, there were fresh flowers in the window boxes, and everything seemed more polished than usual, like she'd been preparing for a special visitor, or like someone who'd suddenly stopped worrying about the cost of home improvement. She opened the door before I could knock, and the sight of her took my breath away. She was dressed in her best blue dress, the one she usually saved for church and family photos. Her silver hair was styled, she was wearing lipstick, and there was something in her expression I hadn't seen in months. She looked happy, not just content or peaceful, but genuinely, radiantly happy, like someone who'd just won the lottery. "There's my girl," she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. Come in, I have so much to tell you." I followed her into the living room, noting that she'd set out her good China tea service, and what looked like a full spread of my favorite cookies and cakes. This was definitely not a typical Friday evening visit. This was either a celebration or the most elaborate goodbye dinner in history. "Grandma, you're making me nervous. What's going on?" She settled into her favorite armchair, still smiling that mysterious smile. "Sit down, honey. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound unbelievable." I perched on the edge of the couch, studying her face. She didn't look sick or worried. If anything, she looked like she was trying not to burst with excitement, like a kid on Christmas morning who'd been told to wait to open presents. "3 months ago," she began, "I bought a lottery ticket at the grocery store. Just one ticket on a whim. I never buy lottery tickets, but something told me to try it that day." My heart sank. Oh no. Grandma Rose had fallen for one of those scams. Someone had convinced her she'd won money, and now they were going to take her for everything she had. Because that's exactly what my week needed. Elderly financial abuse to add to the family drama. "Grandma," I started, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I checked the numbers that night, but I must have done it wrong because I thought I hadn't won anything, so I forgot about it. The ticket sat in my purse for 3 months. She reached into the side table drawer and pulled out an official-looking envelope, the kind that either contains very good news or very bad legal problems. Then, 2 weeks ago, I was cleaning out my purse and found the ticket. I decided to check the numbers one more time, just to be sure. So I went online and looked up the winning numbers from that drawing." She paused, and in that pause, I saw something in her eyes that made me reconsider my scam theory. "Savannah," she said quietly. I matched all 6 numbers. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, processing what she'd just said, because surely she didn't just tell me what I think she told me. "All 6 numbers?" She nodded, then opened the envelope and pulled out an official letter from the State Lottery Commission. The real deal, complete with official seals and legal language. "I won the jackpot, honey. $333 million. The room spun. I blinked hard, sure I was hallucinating, because there's no way my grandmother, who clips coupons and saves every penny, just told me she won more money than some small countries have in their entire treasury. $333 million, I repeated stupidly. After taxes, it's still over $200 million. I chose the lump sum. I looked around the modest living room, at the carefully maintained but clearly aging furniture, at the woman who had been asking her family for help with medication costs just weeks ago, the woman who had been apologizing for needing $200 to stay alive. But you asked them for money for your prescriptions." Her expression changed then, becoming something I'd never seen before. Not quite sadness, not quite anger, but something much more dangerous. "Yes," she said simply. "I did." And in that moment, I understood. The medication request hadn't been about money at all. It had been a test that her family had failed so spectacularly. It would have been funny if it weren't so heartbreaking. The silence stretched between us as I stared at the Lottery Commission letter, the official seal looking impossibly real under her living room lamp. $333 million. The number was so large it felt fictional, like something from a movie about people whose problems I could never understand. "A test," I said slowly, still processing. "You tested them." Grandma Rose nodded, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked not like the sweet, forgiving woman who always made excuses for everyone else's bad behavior. She looked like someone who had made a calculated decision and was entirely at peace with the results. Like a chess master who'd just revealed checkmate. "I had already won the money when I sent that message asking for help with medications," she said. "I could have bought the entire pharmacy if I wanted to, but I needed to know something." "What did you need to know?" "Who would show up for me when there was nothing to gain from it?" The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they perfectly captured what I'd been feeling for months. The family had spent years performing love, showing up when it looked good, when it was convenient, when there might be something in it for them. But when Grandma Rose needed actual help, actual sacrifice, actual inconvenience on their part, they'd shown their true colors. And those colors were ugly. "And?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Only you, sweetheart. Only you showed up." That's when I started crying. Not the pretty tears you see in movies, but the ugly, overwhelming sobs that come from years of feeling like you don't belong anywhere, followed by the sudden realization that you belonged somewhere all along. The relief was so intense it felt like drowning in reverse. Grandma Rose moved from her chair to the couch beside me, pulling me into her arms like she had when I was 4 years old and heartbroken about my mother leaving. Except this time, she was the one who had orchestrated the justice. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered into my hair. "Not because you helped me financially, but because you have a good heart. Because when someone you love needs help, you don't make excuses or look for ways around it. You just help." Revolutionary concept, right? We cried together for a long time, her tears mixing relief and vindication with years of accumulated hurt, mine mixing joy and grief for all the time we'd wasted worrying about money and feeling like we were alone in the world. "So what happens now?" I finally asked, when we'd both composed ourselves enough to talk. Her smile was unlike anything I'd ever seen from her before. Not the patient, long-suffering smile she usually wore, but something that looked almost mischievous, like she'd been planning this moment for months and was savoring every second. "Now we live," she said simply. "Really live. For the first time in decades, I can do whatever I want, go wherever I want, help whoever I want, without worrying about budgets or other people's opinions or whether I'm being a burden." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the small yard where she'd grown vegetables for decades because fresh produce was expensive. "Do you know what the first thing I'm going to do is?" I shook my head. "I'm going to take you on that trip to Europe you used to talk about in college, the one you said you'd take someday when you could afford it." The idea was so surreal I almost laughed. "Grandma, you've never even been on an airplane." "Well, I suppose it's time I started trying new things. Besides, first class is supposed to be quite comfortable." First class. From the woman who used to cut open toothpaste tubes to get the last bit out. Have you ever experienced the moment when your entire understanding of reality shifts so completely that you need to sit down? That's what happened to me as the full implications of what she was telling me sank in. My grandmother, who had clipped coupons and saved every penny for as long as I'd known her, who had worked double shifts to afford my school supplies, who had been worrying about medication costs just weeks ago, was now one of the wealthiest people in our state, and she had used that wealth to conduct the most effective character test I'd ever witnessed. "The family group text," I said suddenly. "You still have all those messages, right?" Her eyes gleamed with something that looked distinctly predatory. "Every single one, including Rebecca's comment about how I've lived long enough and Derek's suggestion about assisted living facilities. And they have no idea you saw their real opinions about you. None whatsoever. They think they were having a private conversation about managing the burden of an aging mother. Little do they know, the burden just became financially independent. I thought about my mother's panicked call after I'd offered to help with the medications, how worried she was that my generosity would make the rest of them look bad, how prophetic that concern had turned out to be. "Are you going to tell them?" I asked. "Eventually, but not yet." She returned to her chair, and I could see her mind working through possibilities. "First, I want to enjoy this time with you. I want to travel and laugh and stop worrying about money and people's feelings. I want to be selfish for once in my life." The word selfish sounded foreign coming from her mouth. Grandma Rose had never been selfish about anything. She had given and given and given until there was almost nothing left, and the people she'd given to had repaid her kindness with callousness. The irony was beautiful in its completeness. "You deserve to be selfish," I said. "You've earned it." We talked until nearly 2 a.m. that night, making plans that ranged from practical to fantastical. She wanted to pay off my student loans, buy a new house with a garden big enough for all the flowers she'd ever wanted to grow, donate to the local animal shelter that had always needed funding. She wanted to travel, learn new things, meet new people who didn't know her as the woman who was supposed to be grateful for scraps of attention from her own children. And she wanted to make sure I was taken care of forever, in a way that no one could ever undo or take away. "You're going to be a very wealthy young woman, Savannah," she said as we finally prepared for bed. "But more importantly, you're going to be free. Free from ever having to depend on people who don't value you." As I lay in my childhood bedroom that night, I thought about the irony of it all. The family had treated both of us like burdens, like people whose needs were inconvenient and whose feelings didn't matter. Tomorrow, they'd still be those same people, living their same small lives, making their same petty complaints. But we would be different. We would be free. And they would never even see it coming. Because sometimes the best revenge is living well. And we were about to live very, very well indeed. The next morning, I woke up convinced I'd dreamed the entire conversation. The idea that my grandmother was a lottery winner worth hundreds of millions of dollars was too surreal to be real. But when I walked into the kitchen and found her making pancakes while actually humming, something I hadn't heard her do in years, I knew it was true. "Good morning, millionaire," I said, testing how the words felt. She laughed, a sound so full of joy and lightness that it made my chest tight with emotion. "Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" Like someone whose entire life just changed overnight. "How are you handling all this? Aren't you overwhelmed?" Because if I suddenly had more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes, I'd probably be having a panic attack in the corner. She flipped a pancake with practiced ease, then turned to face me. "You know what's funny? I thought I would be. I've been living with this secret for 2 weeks, and I expected to feel anxious or frightened about having so much money, but instead I just feel relieved." Relieved? For the first time in my life, I don't have to worry about anything practical. I don't have to choose between groceries and medications. I don't have to feel guilty about wanting something nice for myself. I don't have to depend on people who clearly resent having to help me. She paused, spatula in hand. It's like someone turned off a noise I didn't even realize I was hearing. She set a plate of pancakes in front of me, then sat down with her own. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling out a notebook I'd never seen before. "I've been making lists." The notebook was filled with her careful handwriting, page after page of plans and ideas. Some were practical. Pay off Savannah's student loans. Buy reliable car. Set up emergency fund. Others were dreams she'd apparently been harboring for decades. Visit Ireland, where my grandmother was born. Take cooking classes in Italy. Learn to paint watercolors. But it was the last section that made me emotional. The heading read, "For Savannah," and underneath it was a list of everything she wanted to make possible for me. College fund for future children I might have. Down payment for a house. Seed money for starting my own business. Money for travel, for experiences, for the kind of freedom she'd never been able to give me before. "Grandma, this is too much," I said, though my voice came out choked with tears. "It's not nearly enough," she replied firmly. "You gave up your weekends to drive here and help me when you thought I needed $200 for medicine. You've been the only person in this family to treat me like I matter. This money is going to let me show you how much that means to me." We spent the morning calling lawyers and financial advisors, people who specialized in sudden wealth, because apparently that's a thing that exists. Turns out, when you win 9 figures in the lottery, there are entire industries built around helping you not screw it up. Who knew? By lunchtime, we had meetings scheduled for the following week to establish trust funds, update her will, and create financial structures that would protect both of us for the rest of our lives. "I have one more idea," she said as we finished eating. "What would you say to a little shopping trip?" "What kind of shopping trip?" Her eyes twinkled with mischief. "The kind where we don't look at price tags." 3 hours later, we were walking through the most expensive department store in the nearest city, and I was having an out-of-body experience. Grandma Rose, the woman who had sewn patches on my jeans because new ones were too expensive, was casually buying a handbag that cost more than I made in 2 months. "Try this on," she said, holding up a dress that probably cost more than my rent. "Grandma, I can't." "You can and you will. We're celebrating." Her tone brooked no argument. The saleswoman clearly thought we were wasting her time until Grandma Rose handed over a black credit card I hadn't known she possessed. Then her attitude shifted so dramatically it would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. Suddenly, we were valued customers who deserved personal attention and complimentary champagne. "People are interesting, aren't they?" Grandma Rose murmured as the saleswoman bustled around us with newfound enthusiasm. "Amazing how much more charming you become when they realize you have money." By evening, we were exhausted but exhilarated. The car was full of shopping bags containing clothes, jewelry, and gifts for no reason other than because we could afford them. We stopped at the fanciest restaurant in town and ordered whatever sounded good without calculating the cost. The freedom was intoxicating. "I keep waiting for someone to tell us this is all a mistake," I admitted over dessert. "It's not a mistake, honey. It's justice." That word, justice, resonated with something deep in my chest, because that's exactly what this felt like. Not revenge, which would have been petty, but justice. The universe had somehow rewarded the right person, and that person was using her good fortune to take care of the one family member who had taken care of her. "What do you think they would say if they could see us right now?" I asked. Grandma Rose considered this, twirling her wine glass thoughtfully. "I think they'd be shocked, and then they'd start calculating how they could benefit from it, because that's what they do. They see opportunity, not people." "Are you ready for that conversation? Because eventually you'll have to tell them." "I've been thinking about that," she said, "and I've decided I don't owe them an explanation of when or how I became financially comfortable. I don't owe them anything at all." The finality in her voice told me she had made peace with whatever came next. The woman who had spent decades making excuses for her children's bad behavior was done protecting them from the consequences of their choices. "Besides," she added with a smile that looked almost wicked, "I think I'd rather let them figure it out on their own. Should be entertaining." We drove home that night with the radio playing and the windows down, feeling like teenagers who had just gotten away with something scandalous. For the first time in either of our lives, we had the resources to do whatever we wanted, and we were going to take full advantage of it. The test was over. We had passed with flying colors. Now it was time to collect our prize. Monday morning brought reality crashing back in the form of lawyer meetings and financial planning sessions. But it was a different kind of reality than I'd ever experienced. One where the question wasn't, can we afford this? But how do we want to structure this? I took the week off work, telling my boss I had a family emergency that required my immediate attention. It wasn't technically a lie. Having your grandmother become a 9-figure lottery winner definitely qualified as a family emergency. Plus, I had a feeling my days of worrying about vacation time were numbered. The law office was the kind of place I'd only seen in movies. Mahogany everything, leather-bound books lining the walls, and the subtle scent of expensive cologne and old money. Mr. Harrison, the estate planning attorney Grandma Rose had chosen, was exactly what you'd expect from someone who specialized in managing vast fortunes. He looked like he charged more per hour than most people made in a month. "Mrs. Patterson," he said as we settled into chairs that probably cost more than my car, "I've reviewed the documentation you provided regarding your lottery winnings. First, let me congratulate you on your extraordinary good fortune." "Thank you," Grandma Rose replied with the composure of someone who had been wealthy her entire life. "I'd like to discuss setting up trusts and updating my will." For the next 3 hours, we worked through the details of what would become the most comprehensive estate plan I could have imagined. Grandma Rose was methodical and surprisingly knowledgeable about financial instruments, asking questions that made it clear she'd been researching extensively since winning. Turns out, when you have enough money to buy small countries, you develop an interest in how money works pretty quickly. The first trust was for me. $20 million that would provide annual income for the rest of my life, with the principal remaining intact for any children I might have. $20 million. I had to ask him to repeat the number twice before it sank in. That's more money than I could spend if I tried to live like a movie star for the next 50 years. This structure ensures that Savannah will never have to worry about money, regardless of what happens with the remaining estate, Mr. Harrison explained. The remaining estate. As if $20 million was just the opening act. "The second trust is for charitable giving," Grandma Rose continued. "I want to establish a foundation focused on senior care and support for grandparents raising grandchildren." She was donating $50 million to causes that reflected her own experience. It was generous and personal and exactly what I would have expected from her. But $50 million for charity still left over $100 million for other purposes. But it was the will that really drove home how completely her perspective on family had changed. "I want to be very specific about who is and is not included as a beneficiary," she told Mr. Harrison. "My granddaughter Savannah Patterson is to inherit the remainder of my estate. My daughters Lisa Johnson and Rebecca Williams are to receive $1 each, along with a letter explaining that their treatment of me in my time of need disqualified them from further inheritance." Mr. Harrison made notes without expression, clearly accustomed to family drama in wealthy families. Though I bet most of his cases didn't involve lottery winners conducting elaborate character tests. "I'll also need to specify that my other grandchildren, Tyler, Madison, Derek, and Jennifer, receive nothing. They demonstrated the same lack of character as their parents." "Mrs. Patterson," Mr. Harrison said carefully, "are you certain about these decisions? Family dynamics can change, and estate planning that's done during emotional periods sometimes leads to regrets later." Grandma Rose pulled out her phone and showed him the screenshots of the family group text, the same messages I'd seen weeks ago. His expression shifted as he read through the dismissive responses to her request for help, particularly Rebecca's comment about her having lived long enough. "I'm not making these decisions emotionally, Mr. Harrison. I'm making them based on clear evidence of my family's character. This text thread is from when they believed I was struggling financially and needed help with basic medication costs. Their responses tell me everything I need to know about what kind of people they are." He read through the messages again, his professional mask slipping slightly into something that looked like disgust. Because even a lawyer who specializes in wealthy family dysfunction had probably never seen anything quite this heartless. "I see. In that case, I'll draft the will according to your specifications. However, I should warn you that excluding close family members entirely often leads to contested wills. Are you prepared for that possibility?" "I am. And I want everything documented thoroughly. Every conversation we've had today, every decision I've made, should be recorded and preserved. I want there to be absolutely no question that I was of sound mind and acting of my own free will when I made these choices." By the end of the week, everything was official. Trust funds established, will updated and witnessed, foundation created and funded. Grandma Rose had gone from being a woman who worried about utility bills to being a woman who controlled a charitable foundation with an 8-figure endowment. "How does it feel?" I asked as we left the final meeting. "Like I can finally breathe," she said. "For the first time in my life, I have real power. Not the power that comes from guilt or obligation, but the power that comes from resources and choice." That evening, we celebrated by doing something neither of us had ever imagined possible. We booked first-class tickets to Ireland for the following month. Grandma Rose wanted to see the village where her grandmother had been born, and now she could not only afford the trip, but afford to do it in style that would make the Queen jealous. "Are you ready for the family to find out?" I asked as we planned our itinerary. "I'm ready for whatever happens," she said. "But Savannah, I want you to prepare yourself. When they discover what they've lost, they're going to try to make us feel guilty for their own choices. They're going to claim they were misunderstood, that they really did care about me but were just handling things poorly." She was right, of course. I could already imagine the tearful phone calls, the sudden visits, the attempts to rewrite history and paint themselves as victims of some kind of miscommunication, because that's what people do when they realize their cruelty had consequences. They try to make the victims feel bad for holding them accountable. "Promise me something," she continued. "Promise me that no matter what they say or how much pressure they apply, you won't let them make you doubt what we both know to be true. We saw their real selves when they thought there was nothing to gain from kindness. Everything else is just performance." I promised, though I had no idea how much I would need that reminder in the weeks to come. The test was over. The results were final. Now came the reckoning. The first sign that our secret was about to be exposed came 3 weeks later, while Grandma Rose and I were having lunch at a cafe in downtown Dublin. We were on day 4 of our Irish adventure, stuffed with shepherd's pie and giddy from seeing the cottage where her great-grandmother had been born, when my phone started buzzing incessantly. "Someone's trying very hard to reach you," Grandma Rose observed, sipping her tea with the serenity of someone who no longer cared about other people's emergencies. I glanced at the phone. 17 missed calls from various family members, plus a stream of text messages that made my stomach drop. Because nothing ruins a peaceful afternoon like discovering your dysfunctional family has figured out you're living better than they are. "They know," I said, showing her the screen. The messages were increasingly frantic. "Mom, Savannah, call me immediately. We need to talk about your grandmother. Aunt Rebecca. Why didn't anyone tell us about Mom's lottery win? This is unacceptable. Cousin Derek. We're all coming over to discuss this situation with Grandma Rose. Where are you? Jennifer. Mom is freaking out. What the hell is going on? How did they find out?" Grandma Rose asked, though she didn't look particularly concerned, more like mildly curious about which domino had fallen first. I scrolled through more messages until I found the answer. My cousin Jennifer had posted a screenshot from what appeared to be social media. Someone had recognized Grandma Rose from a photo I'd posted of us at the luxury hotel in Dublin and connected it to a woman they knew had recently won the lottery. Because in the age of social media, even lottery winners can't escape having their business exposed by nosy people with too much time on their hands. "Apparently, someone recognized you from my Instagram post and remembered hearing about a local lottery winner," I said, showing her the evidence. Jennifer saw the comment and put 2 and 2 together. We read through the family's increasingly panicked messages. It was fascinating to watch the progression from confusion to outrage to desperate calculation, all happening in real time across multiple text threads. "Well," Grandma Rose said mildly, "I suppose that settles the question of when to tell them." My phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen. "Should I answer it?" I asked. "Might as well. Better to control the narrative from the beginning." She leaned back in her chair with the air of someone settling in to watch an entertaining show. I answered on speakerphone. "Savannah!" My mother's voice was pitched higher than usual, stress evident in every syllable. "Where are you? We need to talk about your grandmother immediately." "Hi, Mom. I'm in Ireland with Grandma Rose. We're having a lovely time." I took a deliberate sip of my tea. "The weather's been beautiful." "Ireland? What are you doing in Ireland? And why didn't anyone tell us about her lottery winning? We had to find out from social media." "Probably because you blocked her phone number," I said evenly. "Hard to share good news when you won't take her calls." Silence. "Then, that's not the point. The point is this affects the whole family and we should have been informed." "Affects the family how, exactly?" Because I was genuinely curious about their logic here. "Well, obviously there are decisions to be made about how to handle this much money. Financial planning, tax implications, making sure she doesn't get taken advantage of by scammers." The sudden concern for Grandma Rose's welfare was so transparently self-serving that I almost laughed. 3 weeks ago, these same people had suggested she didn't need her medications because she'd lived long enough. Now they were suddenly worried about her being taken advantage of. The irony was beautiful. Mom, she's already handled all the financial planning and tax implications. She's been working with some of the best lawyers and advisors in the state, and spending more on legal fees than you make in a year. But who's counting? She has? Since when does she know about that kind of thing? Since she became worth more than the GDP of small countries, I thought. Amazing how quickly people develop financial sophistication when they have something significant to manage. She's been educating herself with professional help. It turns out she's quite capable of making her own decisions. Look, my mother continued, we're all coming over to her house this evening to discuss the situation as a family. You need to fly back immediately. Actually, no. We'll be in Ireland for another week. You'll have to discuss it without us. The thought of them gathered around her empty house, planning their intervention, was almost too perfect. Savannah, this is not a request. This is a family emergency. Funny, I said. But when Grandma Rose had an actual emergency and needed help with medication costs, you didn't seem to think it warranted much family concern. Grandma Rose nodded approvingly from across the table. More silence. I could practically hear her scrambling for a response that didn't make her sound like the callous daughter we all knew she was. That was different, she finally said. That was just a temporary cash flow issue. This is life-changing money. You're absolutely right, Mom. This is life-changing money. The question is, whose life is it going to change? After I hung up, Grandma Rose and I sat in companionable silence, watching tourists take photos of the ancient castle across from our cafe. Are you ready for what comes next? She asked. I thought about the family members who were probably gathering at her empty house right now, full of righteous indignation about being left out of financial decisions they'd never had any right to be part of in the first place. I'm ready, I said. But are you? This is going to get ugly. She smiled, and there was something almost predatory about it, like a chess player who'd been waiting 20 moves for this exact moment. Sweetheart, it's already been ugly. They made it ugly when they dismissed me as a burden and suggested I might not need to live much longer. Now they're going to learn that ugliness has consequences. My phone buzzed with another text from Rebecca. We know you're influencing her decisions. This needs to stop. I showed Grandma Rose the message. Influencing her decisions, she repeated, shaking her head, as if I'm not capable of making my own choices about my own money. Because clearly, a 77-year-old woman couldn't possibly understand complex concepts like kindness and consequences. What do you want to do? She considered for a moment, then pulled out her own phone. I think it's time for one final test, she said, opening her contacts. Let's see how they react when they realize exactly how much they've lost. She began composing a group text message, her fingers moving with deliberate precision. I understand you're all concerned about my lottery win. Please know that I've made careful, well-considered decisions about my estate planning. Savannah and I are in Ireland celebrating, and we'll be happy to discuss everything when we return. In the meantime, you might want to reflect on how your response to my request for help with medication costs influenced my thinking about family and inheritance. She hit send, then put her phone away. Now we wait, she said. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree with panicked calls and increasingly desperate text messages. But we were 5,000 miles away, sipping tea in a country where none of them could reach us, finally free to enjoy ourselves without their drama and demands. For the first time in our lives, we held all the cards, and we were going to take our time deciding how to play them. The messages that flooded our phones over the next 3 days would have been hilarious if they weren't so pathetically predictable. The family had gone through what appeared to be the 5 stages of grief at warp speed, landing squarely on bargaining with a healthy side of desperation. Rebecca. Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding about our conversation regarding your medications. We were just trying to help you explore all your options. Mom. Sweetheart, you know how much we all love and respect you. Money shouldn't change family relationships. Derek. Grandma Rose, I never said anything about assisted living. I was just asking if you needed help researching senior services in case you ever wanted them. It was coming from a place of love. Jennifer. I think someone might be twisting our words and making us sound terrible. Can we please all sit down and clear the air? Each message was a masterpiece of revisionist history, attempting to reframe their callousness as concern and their neglect as loving support. It was like watching a group of people try to convince you that up was down and black was white. Except they were too panicked to be convincing. They think we're idiots, I said, scrolling through the latest batch while we waited for our flight to London. We decided to extend our trip, adding a few days in England before returning home to face the family circus. They think we're the same people we were a month ago, Grandma Rose corrected. People who would accept their excuses and make allowances for their behavior because we were afraid of being alone. She was right. The family's entire strategy was based on the assumption that we still needed their approval, that we were still the grandmother and granddaughter who would endure their indifference rather than risk complete rejection. They had no idea that everything had changed. We weren't afraid of being alone anymore, because we had each other and the resources to build whatever kind of life we wanted. "Look at this one," I said, reading from my phone. "Tyler says he's devastated that there's been miscommunication in the family and wants to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of honesty and love." The hypocrisy was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Honesty and love," Grandma Rose repeated. Where was the honesty when he participated in group planning that excluded us? Where was the love when he laughed along with jokes about my age and health? The messages had evolved from confused to panicked, to angry to pleading over the course of 72 hours. It was fascinating to watch people who had felt so comfortable dismissing us suddenly realize that their financial futures might have been tied to our goodwill. The transformation from casual cruelty to desperate niceness was almost artistic in its completeness. Mom's latest message was particularly desperate. "Savannah, I know I haven't been the perfect mother, but I've always loved you. Please don't let money come between our family. We can work through this if we just talk." "She wants to work through this," I said, showing Grandma Rose the message. "I'm sure she does. Now that there's something significant at stake." Grandma Rose's voice was dry as dust. Funny how quickly family love resurfaces when there's a fortune involved. The London leg of our trip was pure magic. We stayed at Claridge's, saw 3 West End shows, and took a private tour of Windsor Castle. Every morning brought fresh messages from family members who were clearly spiraling as they realized we weren't rushing home to soothe their feelings and fix their relationships. The desperation was palpable, even through text, but it was the message that came on our last day in London that really drove home how completely they had misunderstood the situation. Rebecca sent a long text that must have taken her an hour to compose. "Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking about our family dynamics, and I realize that maybe we haven't been as attentive as we should have been. I know you must feel hurt and overlooked, and I'm truly sorry for my part in that. When you get home, I'd love to sit down and talk about how we can all do better going forward. I've already started researching care services that might help you with daily tasks, and Derek and I would be happy to take turns checking on you more regularly. We're family, and family takes care of each other. I hope you can forgive us for not seeing that clearly before." I read the message aloud to Grandma Rose as we packed our suitcases. "Care services," she repeated when I finished. "Daily tasks, checking on me more regularly. They still think you're a burden to be managed," I realized. "Even now, knowing you have hundreds of millions of dollars, they're offering to manage your decline rather than actually include you in their lives." The audacity was breathtaking, because that's how they see older people, sweetheart. As problems to be solved, not as human beings with their own agency and desires. She folded her designer clothes carefully, each item probably worth more than Rebecca's monthly salary. "They can't conceive of me as someone with power and choices. To them, I'm still the elderly woman who needs their charity." The flight home gave us 12 hours to prepare for what was waiting. We knew the family would be gathered at Grandma Rose's house, probably planning some kind of intervention or emotional ambush designed to restore their access to the inheritance they'd lost. "Are you nervous?" I asked as our plane began its descent. "Not nervous. Curious. I want to see if they've learned anything from this experience, or if they're just going to double down on their entitlement." She looked out the window at the city lights below. "My money's on entitlement." Based on the text messages, I suspected we already knew the answer to that question. We took a taxi straight from the airport to Grandma Rose's house, arriving at 7 in the evening to find 4 cars in the driveway. Through the front windows, we could see figures moving around inside. The family had made themselves at home in her absence, because nothing says respect for boundaries like breaking into someone's house to plan your financial intervention. "They've been waiting for us," Grandma Rose observed with amusement. "How nice of them to finally take an interest in spending time at my house." As we approached the front door, I could hear voices inside, multiple conversations happening at once, the sound of people who had been waiting too long and were running out of patience. Grandma Rose paused with her key in the lock. "Whatever happens in there, remember what we learned in Ireland," she said. "We're not the same people who left here 3 weeks ago. We don't owe them explanations or apologies. We owe them exactly what they gave us when we needed them. Nothing." She turned the key and pushed open the door. "Hello, everyone," she called out cheerfully. "We're home." The conversation stopped instantly. From the living room came the sound of chairs scraping and footsteps hurrying toward the foyer. They had come to collect their inheritance. They were about to learn there was nothing left to collect. The sight that greeted us in the living room would have been comical if it weren't so perfectly representative of everything wrong with our family dynamics. They had arranged themselves like a tribunal, Mom and Rebecca on the couch, Derek and Jennifer in the armchairs, Tyler and Madison standing behind them like reinforcements. The coffee table was covered with papers, printouts about financial planning, estate law, and what looked like research about lottery winnings. They had prepared for battle. Too bad they'd brought water guns to a nuclear war. "There you are," Rebecca said, standing up with the air of someone who had been deeply inconvenienced. "We've been waiting for hours." "We weren't expecting a welcoming committee," Grandma Rose replied mildly, settling into her favorite chair with the composure of someone entering her own living room. Which, let's be honest, she was. "To what do we owe this gathering?" "Mom, we need to talk about this lottery situation," my mother said, her voice taking on the tone she'd used when I was 10 and had done something that required a serious conversation. "There are important decisions that need to be made, and we're concerned that you might not have all the information you need." I remained standing by the doorway, partly because there wasn't another seat and partly because I wanted to observe the whole scene from a distance. The power dynamic in the room was fascinating. They clearly expected to control this conversation, but Grandma Rose's calm confidence was already throwing them off balance. "What decisions would those be?" she asked. Her voice was pleasant, but I could hear the steel underneath it. "Well, financial planning for one thing," Derek said, leaning forward earnestly. "This much money requires professional management. Tax strategies, estate planning." He gestured to the papers on the coffee table like he was presenting evidence in court. "All of which have already been handled," Grandma Rose said. "I've been working with Harrison, Keller and Associates for the past 3 weeks. Everything is properly structured and legally protected." The look on Derek's face was priceless, like someone had just told him Santa wasn't real. The family exchanged glances. This was clearly not the response they'd expected. "Mom," Rebecca said carefully, "we're just concerned that you might have been influenced in making these decisions. Winning this much money can be overwhelming, and sometimes people take advantage of older individuals who come into wealth suddenly." The implication was clear. I was the one taking advantage of her, because obviously, a 77-year-old woman couldn't possibly make intelligent financial decisions on her own. "Are you suggesting that Savannah is manipulating me?" Grandma Rose asked, her voice still pleasant but with an edge that I recognized as dangerous. "We're not suggesting anything," my mother said quickly. "We're just saying that major financial decisions should probably be discussed with the whole family." "The whole family," Grandma Rose repeated. "Interesting concept. When exactly did we become the kind of family that discusses major decisions together?" Silence. Because they all knew the answer. Never. They had made decisions about holidays, gatherings, and events without consulting either of us for years. But suddenly, when there was money involved, they were all about family unity. "This is different, Mom," Rebecca said. "This affects everyone." "How does it affect everyone?" The question was asked so innocently, but I could see the trap being set. More uncomfortable glances. Because the honest answer was that it affected them financially. But admitting that would mean acknowledging that their concern wasn't actually about her well-being. "Well, inheritance planning, for one thing," Jennifer said. "Making sure the money stays in the family for future generations." "I see. And what makes you think any of you would be inheriting this money?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I watched as the reality of the situation began to dawn on their faces. It was like watching people realize they'd been playing the wrong game entirely. "You're our mother," Rebecca said, as if that explained everything, as if birthing someone guaranteed you access to their fortune decades later. "Yes, I am. I'm also the woman who asked you for help with medication costs 3 weeks ago. And your response was to suggest that I might not need the medications because I'd lived long enough." Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "Grandma Rose, I think there might have been some miscommunication about that conversation." "Miscommunication?" She pulled out her phone and began reading from the saved text messages. "Rebecca Williams. Honestly, at her age, how much longer does she really need these medications anyway? She's already lived longer than most people." Rebecca's face went white. "That's not—" "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it then?" "Because it seems fairly clear to me. I was trying to say that maybe the medications weren't as essential as you thought." Rebecca was flailing now, trying to backpedal from words that couldn't be taken back. "Because I'd lived long enough? That's not what I meant." But we all knew it was exactly what she'd meant. And now she was trapped by her own cruelty. Grandma Rose continued reading from the text thread, her voice steady and matter-of-fact as she recounted each dismissive response, each suggestion that she explore other options rather than expect help from her own children. The documentation was devastating in its completeness. "Do any of you remember sending these messages?" she asked when she finished. Mumbled admissions and attempts at explanation filled the room. They remembered, all right. They just hadn't expected to be held accountable for their words. Good. Because I've been thinking about them quite a lot over the past few weeks. You see, When I sent that message asking for help, I already had the money to pay for my medications. I already had enough money to pay for everyone's medications for the rest of their lives. The room went completely still. Completely. You could have heard a pin drop. I was testing you. All of you. I wanted to see who would show up for me when there was nothing to gain from it. Understanding dawned on their faces, followed quickly by panic. The chess game they thought they were playing had actually been over for weeks. Only Savannah passed that test. Only Savannah offered to help without conditions or judgment. Only Savannah treated me like family when she thought I had nothing to offer in return. Mom, my mother said desperately, if we had known... If you had known what? If you had known I was wealthy, you would have been kinder. If you had known there was something to gain, you would have been more generous? Her voice was cutting now, all pretense of pleasantness gone. That was exactly what she was saying, but she couldn't admit it without sounding as terrible as she actually was. We can do better, Derek said. We can learn from this and be a real family going forward. I'm sure you can, Grandma Rose agreed. But you'll be doing it without access to my money. She stood up and walked to the mantel, where she kept important papers. I've updated my will, she announced, pulling out an official-looking document. Savannah inherits everything. The rest of you get $1 each, along with copies of the text messages that explain why. The explosion of voices was immediate and overlapping. You can't be serious! This is crazy, Mom! Savannah poisoned you against us! You're making a huge mistake. But Grandma Rose remained calm, letting them rage until they exhausted themselves. She'd had weeks to prepare for this moment, and their reactions were exactly what she'd expected. I'm completely serious, she said when they finally fell silent. And my decision is final. The will has been properly executed and witnessed. Mr. Harrison assures me it's legally unbreakable. Mom, please. Rebecca tried one last time. We're your daughters. Yes, you are. And when I needed you to act like daughters, you acted like strangers. Now you can live with the consequences of that choice. One by one, they left, some angry, some pleading, all of them finally understanding that their years of casual cruelty had cost them everything. The house fell quiet, except for the sound of car doors slamming and engines starting. When the last car pulled out of the driveway, Grandma Rose and I sat in her quiet living room, surrounded by the papers they'd left scattered on the coffee table. How do you feel? I asked. Free, she said simply. For the first time in my life, completely free. And we were. Free from people who only valued us when we could benefit them. Free from the obligation to accept poor treatment because it came from family. Free to build whatever kind of life we wanted, surrounded by people who chose to love us without conditions. The lottery had given us money, but the test had given us something more valuable. Clarity about who truly belonged in our lives. And as it turned out, we were enough for each other. More than enough. Because sometimes the best families aren't the ones you're born into. They're the ones you choose. And we had chosen each other, long before there was any money involved. That's a love that can't be bought, sold, or inherited. That's a love that lasts.